Well, welcome to you to the next of our personal ponderings in the Psalms, and we're looking at Psalm 4 today. I want to begin by reading a short quote from a commentary by Stephen Lawson that I have written in the margin of my Bible, and I think is helpful for us as we look at this psalm. Lawson writes, "Life should be lived with the assurance of God's sovereignty, knowing that he rules over everything for his glory. Even when it seems as if the ungodly have dominated the scene, believers should remember that God has chosen the godly for himself and will not forsake them." I mentioned in our last study that I think Psalm 3 and 4 form a sort of pair, in that Psalm 3 is a morning psalm as the psalmist wakens, conscious of God's protection of him through the night. Psalm 4 is an evening psalm. It closes with the psalmist saying, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep." But I think there's another sense in which these two psalms are connected, although we can't prove this. I think they both probably come from the same historical setting. Psalm 3 was David on the run from his son Absalom, and Psalm 4, I think, fits very much into that same scenario, although it applies in many, many other ways as well. I want to just quickly walk you through this psalm. I want you to notice that he begins with an appeal to God based on God's past track record. He says, "You have given me relief when I was in distress." So he's prayed to God, conscious that God has helped him in the past, therefore God will help him again. But look at the wonderful way in which he describes God. "O God of my righteousness." What a bold statement to make to God. But David is affirming that he is right before God. He's in a right standing with God. And then therefore there's a sense in which he can claim things from God, because he is the God of his righteousness. And then verses 2 to 3 and 4 to 6, there are two appeals to his enemy. In the first one, verses 2 to 3, he's appealing to them to desist, because their attempts are in vain, because God has set apart David, the godly king, for himself, and so all the efforts of his enemies will come to nothing. And again, we know this from Absalom's situation. Absalom trashed David's reputation. Absalom undermined David's divine glory, as it were, divinely bestowed glory as the king. And so David is speaking with confidence here to his enemies. Stop wasting your time. God has set me apart for himself, and he will hear me when I call to him. And then the second appeal, verses 4 to 6, is a very bold and strong appeal. The ESV translates this as "be angry and do not sin," but you could rightly translate this as "tremble in the fear of God." Realize that when you attack God's servant, you actually attack God. When you're plotting against the godly, you're actually plotting against God. Do you remember God saying to Saul on the road to Damascus, "Why are you persecuting me?" Because when you attack God's people, you attack God. And they're doing this while they're carrying on their religious efforts. Notice he says in verse 5, "Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord." We know from 2 Samuel 15 that Absalom was carrying out sacrifices in the normal way. All the time he was mutinying against his father, the divinely appointed king. So David says, offer right sacrifices and put your trust in Yahweh. And then verses 6 to 7, he appeals again to God. And he prays to God as an echo here of the great Aaronic blessing in Numbers chapter 6. "Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord." That's the blessing we need. And that blessing will give us more joy and more contentment in our heart than all the material things that men and women delight in. "You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound." A new harvest was a time of great celebration and festivity for this pastoral people of David's time. But David says all of that pales into insignificance compared with the joy and the riches that you give me in my heart, in my relationship with you. And then it ends with this wonderful verse of assurance in verse 8. "In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." So my enemies can be all around me. They can be plotting against me. They can be ganging up against me, threatening all sorts of things. But true peace and joy does not depend on my circumstances. It depends on the protection and the provision and the purposes of God. And if you're a Christian today, then God is the God of your righteousness. He has set you apart for himself. He hears you when you call to him. And although terrible things may happen to you, and great enemies may come against you, and circumstances may be very difficult, you can lie down and sleep in peace, because God is the one who gives us safety as we sleep. May God bless his word to our hearts.